Hey everyone, and welcome to Teach Me in 10, a video series brought to you by Technology Networks. Here we invite scientists to describe their research area in less than 10 minutes. My name is Rhianna Lilly, and I'm a junior science editor for Technology Networks. Our guest today is Alison Van Eenennaam. Alison is a professor of cooperative extension in the field of animal genomics and biotechnology at the University of California, Davis, where she's been on faculty for over 20 years. Today, Alison is going to be teaching us about gene editing in animals looking at livestock in just 10 minutes. So we'll dive straight in then. So over to you, Alison.
I work in the field of animal genetics at the University of California. And of course, geneticists have been involved in really dramatically changing the appearance of our animal populations. If you think about the dog you have living in your house, it's very different to its ancestor, the wolf, from which it was selected. And of course, it's been selected for things like, hopefully, having a temperament that doesn't involve eating your own children. And so we do that by selecting on naturally occurring DNA genetic variations that exist that give us different phenotypes. So dogs look differently, and certain breeders said, oh, I really like the look of a Chihuahua or a Great Dane or a Labrador, or I like the behavior of a shepherd dog for herding sheep, and developed different breeds using natural selection, or actually it's called artificial selection, but it's just based on naturally occurring genetic variations. And if you think of that from the dog perspective, that's all good and fun, but it becomes very important in our livestock populations because genetic improvement has basically increased the unit production of things like milk and meat and eggs, such that, for example, a cow today is producing around about 4 times the amount of milk that she did in the 50s. And the knock-on effect of that is that the environmental carbon footprint of a glass of milk today from these genetically improved animals is about 1/3 of what it was in the 1950s. And so there's a very real sustainability implication of improved breeding. And breeders have used naturally occurring genetic variation. And then there are some new technologies that allow us to introduce useful traits to our livestock populations. 30 years ago, there was genetic engineering, or so-called GMOs, if you want to use the scary term, where you basically introduce DNA, typically from a different organism, to give an animal a trait that you wanted it to have. In the example of the aqua-advantaged salmon, which you may have heard of, it was being able to get to market weight in about half the time of a conventional salmon as a result of having some DNA sequence from the Pacific salmon, which is a different species to Atlantic salmon. So we have had that technology, but we, as animal breeders, we really haven't been able to use it because of the public kind of pushback against GMOs in plants. And I call it the Monsanto effect, which has nothing to do with livestock. But it put a kind of a regulatory regime in place that makes it virtually impossible for a small company, or let alone academia, to bring anything to market. And so there just wasn't the investment to basically pursue genetic engineering in livestock, with the exception, of course, of the aqua-advantaged salmon. So then we come along about a decade ago with the new technologies of genome editing. And genome editing describes a technology to introduce a double-stranded break in the DNA at a targeted location based on known sequence. So you can basically design editors to go into any location in the genome, the 3 billion base pairs that make up the bovine genome, for example, and introduce a double-stranded break. And then when that repairs, you can actually get slight imperfections such that it inactivates a gene. And you might want to do that if the gene gives the animal a characteristic that's undesirable. For example, in the case of cattle, horns are a characteristic that is not desired because animals can hurt each other with the horns, and they're human handlers. And so in many dairy systems, they're actually mechanically removed, usually using heat. There's a genetic variation that makes animals not grow horns, and that's evident in certain breeds like Angus, for example, are naturally hornless, or polled is the term. And that's because of a naturally occurring insertion of a little sequence at the gene called POLD that gives it a dominant trait of not growing horns. And that probably wouldn't be advantageous if you're out in the wild, I don't know, fending off coyotes. But in our situations where we've got animals that are in production systems, that's not really a selective advantage. And so breeders really like that. And that's a fixed characteristic now in, for example, Angus. So using things like genome editing, if we actually provide the sequence of that little alteration in with our editing reagents, we can actually substitute that particular allele into that breed and give, for example, polled Holsteins. So dairy cows that don't grow horns, but we haven't lost all that amazing genetics that we've been selecting for the last 50 years. And I think, to me, genome editing is an approach to introduce useful traits into our existing livestock population. So we're still going to be doing conventional selection for all of the many traits that make an animal optimally suited to a production system. It just gives us the ability to introduce a single trait, such as horns. And so that's one example, but there's actually some really compelling examples, I think, that not only address a welfare trait like POLD, but also animal health. And a really obvious one there is disease resistance. And so globally, I think we lose somewhere around about 20% of our livestock to disease of various sorts. And there are certain diseases that we know if we inactivate a gene, we remove the target site where that virus can gain access to the animal. And so a really classic example in this regard is the what's called the porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome virus, goes by the name of PRRS. And there is a company, actually an English company, Genus, that through their Pig Improvement Corporation has actually started the development of a line of pigs that have a gene knocked out using genome editing that are no longer susceptible to PRRS, which is a multi-billion-dollar disease. It's respiratory disease, so it's like COVID, but it also has reproductive issues as well. So it's really a bad disease. And that would actually produce pigs that are no longer susceptible to that disease. And that's, to me, really a triple win for sustainability, because the pigs don't get sick and die. They don't need to be treated with antibiotics. It's good for the farmer. Sick pigs aren't good for farmers. And it's good for the environment, because a sick or a dead pig is a big drain on a system when it doesn't produce any nutritious food out the other end. And so there's really a lot of opportunities, I think, for things like that, where we know how a microbe interacts with an animal to produce animals that are no longer susceptible to that particular microbe. And that's not the only example. So there's welfare traits, there's disease-resistant traits. There are things that can make an animal more tolerant of heat. So you can have cattle that are better able to cope with very hot climates through an alteration called SLIC, which is an alteration of the prolactin receptor that gives an animal a really shiny, sleek coat. And it keeps the body temperature about 1 degree lower than an animal without that particular trait. Again, that's a naturally occurring mutation. It occurs in Senepol breed. What if we could bring that into some of our other breeds of cattle to help them cope with an adapting environment or a heating environment? So I think there's a lot of different opportunities there. And so breeders are excited about this, and there's a lot of work going on around the world, particularly in China, I think has the most publications in this space. But will any of these products actually get to market? You know, I said the Aqua Advantage salmon is the only genetically engineered product that's ever got to market as a food product. And actually the answer is yes, and it's already happened. And so it's perhaps a little known fact that there's a group called Regional Fish in Japan that has produced 3 different genome edited fish, basically fish that are able to grow and get to finish more rapidly, more fuel efficient if you want fish. And they have gone through the Japanese regulatory system and got approval, and those fish are now being sold to consumers in the marketplace and have had no pushback from the public at all. And I guess that's one thing I think that we see is when consumers actually are given the opportunity to buy these products, whether it's genome edited or genetically engineered, like there's a pink pineapple you can get that has no public pushback on it. There's now a purple tomato, I think, that was developed also in the UK. And so if you produce products that people want, then I think that this kind of narrative that the public won't accept this, it doesn't really bear out when you actually have the opportunity to purchase the product. And so getting things into the marketplace is a really critical step to this technology, in addition to the technical aspects of getting the animals edited. And there's a variety of different regulatory approaches that are being taken around the world, and many countries like Japan and many countries in South America are basically treating edits that could have been achieved using conventional breeding, so things like bringing an alteration from one breed to another. They're not treating those differently to conventional breeding, which just allows them to come to market as would any other cow. And that's really encouraging, and it's really opened up the space for small companies and even academia to actually start kind of testing the waters to actually put products out there. And I think the range of species we're seeing work on, and the different traits we're seeing, and the different entities that are doing the research, and particularly the small companies, I think is really exciting and really differentiates it from what happened with GMOs or genetic engineering, where you had basically only large multinational companies could afford the multi-million-dollar regulatory package it took to get those products approved. And so I'm excited about how this technology could be used to augment and complement conventional breeding programs to accelerate the rate of genetic change in our livestock populations and produce animals that are more resilient to disease, temperatures, and that have other attributes that align with things like animal welfare, such as the polled or horned example. And so that's how this technology, which is super important in human medicine, is also being applied to the very important job of improving the efficiency and sustainability of our livestock production systems.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing with me today, Alison. That was really interesting. A big thank you to Alison for joining me today at Teach Me in 10. If you'd like to learn more about Alison and her research, make sure you check out the links in the description box below. Stay tuned for our next episode of Teach Me in 10. Bye!